Now, we have lots of stuff because this will be quite serious topics, right? Russia. I mean, is Russia going to be a great power again? I mean, is this a small topic? Is this a small topic? No, not at all. Is China going to rise and challenge America, right? I mean, this is really, right, the essence of global politics. And India, right? So Russia, China, India. And in answering the question of a country, big country, right? A big country becoming a great power, I think we need to understand what is needed to become a great power, right? So we have to have some understanding of some requirements for being a great power, right? Whether or not Russia meet those requirements, whether or not what is lacking, right? What is lacking in Russia becoming a great power again, and what is lacking in China becoming a great power, and same goes for India, right? So you need to have some basic understandings of. It's not just about political science. It's about general, I think, knowledge about society or countries, right? I think, in my opinion, I think when a country becomes a great power, we have studied this, I think, in introductory political science, right? Where does power come from, right? What constitutes power for countries? You might have looked at, as a power source, you might have looked at maybe territory, size of territory, right? And population size. I don't think countries like, population size of 1 million could become a great power, right? Population is important. Population itself gives power, right? So territory, you need to have some sizable territory, sizable population. Then economic, right, base. You need to have economic base. And you need to have a functioning political system, right? And you need to have a social harmony, right? So you need to have everything, right? You could think of about society. But why these countries are included as a separate chapter here? Why Russia, China, India? Why is it important to study these countries in terms of becoming a great power? Again or newly, is that these countries don't classify. I mean, these countries do not fit into these traditional great power conceptions. Some way or another, I mean, these countries are lacking, right, in some respects, in becoming great power. Either they lack in economic base, or if they have some economic base, they lack in political freedom, right, or social harmony, or military power. So I think these countries are great, I think, examples or experiments to, I think, study, examine, right? I mean, the traditional, conventional question of what is a great power, right? What constitutes power, right? Is it possible for a country to become a great power with only economic and military power and without political stability, right? I think these China, Russia, India, they raise these questions, right? somehow they are lacking in some respects. So based on these, I think, new conceptions of great power requirements, I think that we have to come to some agreement as to, whether or not these new powers, so to speak, new powers really become great powers. I mean, to be powerful enough to challenge America or other advanced countries, right? Now, Russia. Let's talk about each country, like spending about 15 minutes for each country. India. I mean, Abhishek, you might help me out when you talk about India, because India, I don't have enough knowledge about India. But I can talk about Russia. I can talk about China. Now, let's talk about first Russia. Russia, I think that first in terms of the question whether or not Russia can rise as a great power again, we need to, I'm not going to get into all the details of how Russia collapsed, right, in the 1980s. Then it's quite important to have some basic knowledge about the period of the collapse, Soviet collapse, right? Then the period of the decade of 1990s, right? Russia was reborn, right? Went through so-called post-communist transition. There was like a twin transitions along market, transition, then democratic political transition, right, throughout the 1990s. Then Russia was reborn, and multi-ethnic, empire collapsed. So Russia was separated as a single, not monolithic. I mean, still Russia still has a lot of different multinational ethnic groups, but much smaller, much cohesive than than in the Soviet period. So Russia was reborn as a ethnic-based country. Then politically, I think Russia was reborn, economically reborn. That's how Russia went through the 1990s, then 2000s. So the difference between the decade of 1990s, the decade of 2000s, you have different leaders, right? 1990s, you have most of the 1990s, much of 1990s, you have President Yeltsin. Then you have most of the decade of 2000, President Yeltsin, President Putin, or President Medvedev. It doesn't matter. Who, right? These twin, right? Dual power system, right? It's very convenient, right? Like a system. So that's how Russia, I think, evolved from the collapse of the Soviet Union to become a new Russia, which is transformed, but transformed in a way that we didn't expect, right? Didn't meet the Western expectations. So that Russia, the new Russia, I think, despite all the transitions, changes, I think has become a very hybrid, right, kind of system where market reform was introduced, but the economic system is still, right, inefficient, right, and still struggling in many respects. Politically, even more problems, right? Political freedom and political stability, and to follow Western standards, Russia doesn't meet, right, in many respects, the standard definition of democracy, Western type of democracy. Um, although we don't have any exact like a term that could describe the Russian political system, right? Because our existing terminology, right, democracy, doesn't describe the current Russian political system. Now, the point I want to make about Russia in terms of whether or not Russia is going to rise as a power, I think I want to introduce probably I want to provide three important criteria. This is not my own, but I've studied this topic for a long time. I have come to this conclusion in terms of how Russia could evolve or even to become a great power. Number one, I think in terms of how Russia evolves, number one, I think important point or obstacle is Russia must escape resource dependence. That's most important thing that Russia has to overcome to become a great power, right? Which means that the Russian economy is still dependent on resource exports, like the Middle Eastern countries. This is a fact. This is a fact. And this affects many aspects of Russian political life and economic life and foreign policy. Right? How dependent? How much dependent? According to official opinion, when a country depends on resource exports, 10% of GDP, that makes a resource-dependent country. 10% of GDP, that's the ceiling. 10% of GDP. And 40% of exports. 40% of exports. Right? Russia, in terms of GDP portion of resource exports, 20%. Right? In terms of exports, 55%. Right? So Russia is much more than a resource-dependent economy. And you all know Russia has a lot of oil and gas reserves. Oil reserves only second to Saudi Arabia. Natural gas reserves only second to Iran. Right? And production amount, oil production number one. Natural gas production and export, number one. Right? Then, what problems? Then why should the question? This is an important question. Can Russia continue to rely on resource exports and to become a great power and successful economy, prospering economy? Why is it a problem in the first place to rely on oil and gas exports? Right? We need to ask this question first. Right? Can Russia, depend on resource exports for 50 years, right? Then maybe 50 years later, Russia sort of diversified the economy a little bit, right? To become a normal, right? Economy. How about that, right? Maybe that's what Putin. Maybe that's Putin's strategy, right? So this problem, I mean, resource dependence, in academic scholarship, right? When a country depends on oil and gas exports, country suffers a particular problem, and this problem is known as the resource curse. This is something known as the resource curse. And there are some stylized facts. Resource curse, you have two kinds of resource curse. Economic resource curse, then political resource curse. Okay? Economic resource curse is called Dutch disease. It's casually called Dutch disease. Okay? There are four stylized symptoms about so-called economic resource curse. In other words, if you rely on oil and gas exports, the economy tend to suffer these problems. First, exchange rate tends to appreciate. Okay? If you rely on oil and gas exports, one of the problems is that the currency, the national currency, tends to appreciate, right? Because you have rapid inflow of oil and gas revenues. Right? This is often called petrodollars. So to stave off, to protect the economy from inflation and currency appreciation, you need to do something about this rapid inflow of petrodollars, right? You need to maybe exchange it into local currency in the foreign exchange market, or you need to save it. You need to put it into some account, stabilization fund, right? So that nobody can touch it, right? So the economy is heated and inflation occurs, right? And the currency appreciates. This is exactly why this is called Dutch disease, because the Netherlands in the 1960s, the Dutch economy, the government of Netherlands in the 1960s, they have found a huge natural gas reserve off the coast of North Sea, right? Then they began to dig up natural gas offshore, then began to export, and they enjoyed these, dollars, revenues, new source of revenues. But side effect was inflation, currency appreciation. The economy right, they found that these exports of natural gas was a blessing, but the blessing comes with a lot of side effects. And these side effects, right, unless you take care of these problems, you have serious problems. Second symptom, manufacturing sector decline. This is second problem, manufacturing sector decline. This is so-called deindustrialization. Deindustrialization. This is an interesting phenomenon. When an economy depends on exports, right? Certain specific sector, or oil and gas, or even agricultural crops, or Korean case, Samsung, semiconductor. If Korea depends too much on semiconductor export, we might face similar problems. Right? Deindustrialization. Okay, manufacturing industry doesn't grow. There are several reasons why. Best example, Nigeria. When Nigeria depend on oil exports, they have become a net importer of even food, rice, all the crops. They had to import, right? Because the industry, agriculture industry, doesn't grow because they so much focused on oil and gas exports. So this is manufacturing sector decline. Thirdly, service sector growth, which is in some respects a good thing, but they include this because in terms of health of the economy, manufacturing is the most productive sector, right? So when you rely on, right, oil and gas exports, manufacturing sector decline, service sector, oil and gas sector, only oil and gas and service sector grow. Now, in general, inflation, wages, right, increase. Particularly wage growth in the oil and gas sector, right, rather than manufacturing, agriculture. Right? That's why manufacturing declined because of this wage gap, right? The booming sector suck all the labor forces from, right, declining sectors. So these are common, okay, symptoms. The question is, we need to apply these to Russia, right? In terms of the Russian economy, right? The 1990s, 2000s, whether or not Russia suffered these symptoms, right? Russia, yes, fits the definition of resource-dependent economy, right? 2000s, and that was Putin's strategy. Then there are many studies on the Russian resource curves, right? And how these different problems, right, occurred in the Russian economy. So that some studies look into manufacturing sector in Russia, like in the decade of 2000s, right? And these problems, right? And how Russia, the central bank of Russia, how they protected the Russian economy from, right, appreciation. There are many studies. There are some opposite views, but in general, Russia fits the resource curves. Okay, then how should Russia escape? Right? How should Russia escape the resource curves? Can the Russian economy diversify, right, away from resource dependence, oil and gas exports, right, to become, right, strong manufacturing, right, and strong, I don't know how strong the service sector is, right, but the economy is not balanced, at least. So my point again, right, to become a great power, to become a successful economy, this is key. This is key. Diversification, strengthening of the manufacturing industry, right? Which is difficult, very difficult. Politically, I mean, why Putin comes back? How many times has he been elected? Maybe we don't even remember, right? Because he comes back and hides, comes back again, right? So it's not desirable, right? System. The reason I think why Russian democracy doesn't move forward. The reason again, because of these, political resource curse. Without oil and gas, I don't think Putin will behave like this. Putin was confident because the fact that he was backed up by all these oil revenues, oil incomes, right? So some authors like the famous proposition by Thomas Friedman, right? Petropolitics 101. In his theory, the famous New York Times columnist, right? Thomas Friedman, he submitted very famous, very interesting proposition called Petropolitics 101, according to which there is a proven scientific theory where there is a correlation between oil prices and dictatorship in oil exporting countries. The higher oil prices, the more dictatorial the leaders in oil exporting countries. Right? Here the examples are Nigeria, Venezuela, Colombia, Russia. Putin fits squarely into this proposition, Petropolitics 101 proposition. Right? I'm talking about the political aspect. If you go back, 1997, oil price was $10. Okay, oil price was $10. Then 1998, there was a global level financial crisis that hit, right, Thailand, Korea, Russia. Russian economy suffered a lot, 1998. But right after the global financial crisis, 1998, the Russian economy rebounded, right, rapidly. The reason was oil prices began to rise, beginning 1999, right? Then Yeltsin, the ailing, inefficient leader, Yeltsin, old, he stepped down 1999. Then he introduced his successor, President Putin, former KGB. That was 1999. Right? Then Putin came in. He was very lucky because international oil market was supporting his regime. Putin knew that, right? Then his motto when he was rising, when he was emerging as a former KGB turned politician from St. Petersburg, his motto was strong Russia. He was contrasting Yeltsin's Russia to Putin's Russia. Yeltsin's Russia was weak, okay, and divided by Western powers. Privatization, economic reform, right, political crisis, everything was, right, weakening Russia, right? So Yeltsin's Russia was weak. Then he promotes himself as a strong leader, right? Strong Russia. Then what backed up him, his regime was rising oil prices. Russia was becoming rich because of rising oil prices, beginning 1999, after global financial crisis. How fast oil prices were rising? Very fast. There were two stages. First stage was this is oil price. Beginning was 1999. (2004). So there are two stages. Oil prices began to rise. First stage. This is first stage. Okay, this is like when an airplane, right, prepares for, right, takeoff. The airplane, like this is taxing stage. Taxing. Second stage, takeoff. This is takeoff. Putin emerged in 1999, right? He knew the market was changing. Oil prices were rising. He was becoming rich. He's confident, right? Then his behavior changes according to these oil price movements, right? Taxing stage. Taxing stage, he's not that arrogant still. Okay, taxing stage, not arrogant yet. But takeoff stage, very arrogant. Right? Everything was in his hand. Takeoff stage. What explains this? What explains Putin's behavior? His psychology, his philosophy. What explains this? I think the best determinant, the best variable. There are many factors, but the best variable is oil prices. Nothing other than oil prices explains Russian political system at that time, in the decade of 2000s. Maybe if you go back, 1991, 1998, Yeltsin's Russia, weak. Then what explains Yeltsin's behavior? He's not confident, he's always drunk, right? Russia was always in troubles, right? Leaders, politics was always divided, right? Different, ideologies. What explains Russia in the 1990s? Again, according to this resource curse theory, oil prices explains. Oil prices, like I said, from 1991 until 1998, around $10. Okay, in general, there were ups and downs, but not higher than 15 at the most. So oil price is $10. Then here, taxing stage, still much higher, right? I think that, right, 40 to 50. Let's say $40 to $50. Taxing stage, $40 to $50. He's beginning to have a lot of cash here. Putin is going to have a lot of cash here. And here, takeoff stage, 50 to 100, 145. Right? He has a lot of cash. Right? He has a lot of cash. He's full of money. The difference, right? You can imagine how big the gap is between, right, this period and this period. And this affects, right? This affects Russian economy. Okay? This is a boom period. Russian economy was booming after 1998. But at the same time, Russian economy was suffering the symptoms, right? high inflation, appreciation, right? Manufacturing decline, right? These symptoms, not here, but here. Manufacturing must be better here. Clearly, manufacturing better. Oil and gas, worse. But here, oil and gas much better. But manufacturing and agriculture much worse here. So this is a choice. For countries like Russia and Middle Eastern countries, this is a choice. In terms of politics, more political freedom here, according to Western standards. Right? More political progress. Russia was coming closer to Western definition of democracy here. Many more political parties. Elections were much more competitive. Much more competitive, meaning everything is just open. Nobody can decide. Nobody knows the outcome. So that's competitiveness. So elections were much more competitive, and diversity of political parties, diversity of ideologies. For Russians, that might have been presented as a chaos. Diversity, right, has two sides, right? It's a freedom, but at the same time chaos. Right? And Putin, period, post-1999 period, in terms of politics, right? You have smaller choice. Right? Smaller choice. Ideology, not diverse. Right? And repression of media. So, again, in terms of politics, more democracy here. Low oil prices, more democracy. This is what Thomas Friedman submitted. High oil prices, right? Low democracy. This is Petropolitics 101. This is political resource curse. So in terms of political development, countries are better off when they have low oil prices. This is irony, right? Corruption, even worse here. Corruption. And there are many things that we can observe. Oil companies and natural gas companies tend to be nationalized here. They tend to expel foreign investment, foreign investors. But here, more foreign investment. Okay, more foreign investment. So there is a contrast between these two periods. Now, 2014, today, then what's happening 2014 or after 2014? I think the period beginning 1999 may be coming to an end today. This high oil price cycle may be coming to an end due to shale revolution. Due to shale revolution. Then maybe 2014, let's say, or maybe even earlier, 2013, right? This high oil price period was coming to an end. The new period is beginning, where oil prices going down, natural gas prices going down, right? Russia has to retool the economic system. Putin may be in a leadership crisis, right? Because he's losing money, right? This theory, $10, $100, right? Everything, $10, $100. Then what? We don't know. But must be lower than $100. This will determine Putin's government. But from Western perspective, it's better for Russia. Right? Some democratic progress we can expect, right? Although the leader lose money, but citizens might enjoy some more benefits. That's the expectation. Now, so this is the first aspect. First aspect, or first obstacle in terms of whether Russia can move forward and become a great power. Second thing, in becoming a great power, Russia must overcome. This chapter discusses former Soviet, former Eastern European countries, right? Former Eastern European countries. I think this is not appropriate sections. This chapter begins with discussions about transitions in Eastern European countries, right? Different Eastern European countries, different groups of Eastern European countries, Central Eastern European countries like Poland, Czech, Hungary. They are better performers, whereas Balkan countries, Balkan Eastern European countries like Bulgaria, Romania, right? Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia. These countries are worse performers compared to CEE, Central Eastern European countries. And what are the reasons? And how about Baltic countries, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, right? And we have all the data about GDP per capita for these countries, political development, right? All the standards for different groups. And clearly, former Eastern European countries, including CEE, Baltic countries, Balkan countries, right? It's interesting to see how these different Eastern European countries perform differently, right? But the real question is not to see how these different Eastern European countries perform differently. The real question is, these countries are technically still attached to the Russian economy. That's the main point. In other words, the second obstacle in terms of whether or not Russia can rise as a great power is, from the Russian perspective, these countries are still important for Russia. If Russia loses the economic and political connections to former Eastern European countries, okay, or Central Asian countries, okay, that will determine Russia's place in world politics. That's the second thing you have to study, right? Political economic connections between former Eastern European countries and Central Asian countries to Russia. What is happening today in terms of Russian relations to Eastern Europe, Russian relations to Central Asia? These countries are still very important, right? Still very important. It's important in the sense that first, I think the Soviet system was highly structured, like an empire, where in terms of functions, right, Russian economy, the Soviet Moscow center, is a hub, okay? Then revolving around this hub, you have all satellite economies, right? That play different roles, right? Some regions provide materials, right? Machinery, agriculture, things like that, right? So it's every satellite country plays some specific role for the hub, right? Still true. That's why these countries are still important for Russia. If Russia loses these countries, I think the future for Russia is very dark. Both aspects, political, economic. Right? So these are, I think, things that you have to study. Right? Ukraine, good example, very good example. Ukrainian crisis, you need to study, why, right? Ukrainian crisis in the first place, right? Happened. Central Asia, very important, right? Central Asian energy, right? Central Asian energy, Russia. What's the connection? That's important topic. Why Central Asian countries are important for Russia, right? Eastern European countries again. How much influence Russia still exercises over Eastern European countries? Poland, Czech, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, right? Romania, Bulgaria, they have become, right, member of the EU. What remaining influence Russia has over these countries? So these are second aspect, right? Third aspect, China, Russia-China relations. That's I think, Russia-China relations, I think, again, will determine the future of Russia. The future of Russia. Very important. Very important. Particularly so when Russia loses influence in the European part. Okay? When Russia loses influence in Europe, Russia looks to Asia. Right? To make up for the loss in Europe, Russia looks to Asia. When Russia looks to Asia, you have China, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Europe, ASEAN. Right? China particularly important. Particularly important. Right? Important in the sense that I think number of reasons. First reason, I think the most immediate reason why China is important. First immediate reason, I think energy exports. Energy exports. China is a huge market, enormous market. Both aspects, oil and gas, enormous market. So Russia is trying to export both oil and gas to China. Right? Ukrainian crisis, I think the essence of Ukrainian crisis, what is Ukrainian crisis? In my opinion, I think some says that, world politics has reverted to the new Cold War between the United States and Russia over Europe, over Eastern Europe, right? Including Ukraine. That means, I think, that the political Berlin Wall, right? The Berlin Wall over political freedom or some economic rights. That Berlin Wall, I think, came crumbling down in 1989, right? 1989. Then European countries freed from Soviet repression. Right? Then they were able to select their own system. Right? They have opted. Eastern European countries they have opted to adopt Western type of democracy, market economy, rather than Soviet type of democracy or Soviet type of economy. Right? That's Berlin Wall, 1989. Now, what's happening now is political economic barriers, right, between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. That collapsed 1989, but energy Berlin Wall still remains. Energy war, right? Because Eastern European countries, they have become politically dependent, politically independent, but in terms of energy, they are still dependent on Russia. That's why this current crisis is occurring now, right? So this is final, I think, stages of so-called European integration. Without this energy Berlin Wall collapsing, I don't think European integration will be complete. So this may be, I think, the harbinger of, right, the final stages of European integration. We don't know yet. I mean, if Russia continues to control over Eastern European countries for energy, then I think you have to wait, probably, right? But anyway, Russia is dividing still Europe, right? Half and half. Western European countries, in terms of energy, relatively free, but Eastern European countries dependent on Russia. Russia knows that. Russia uses energy as a weapon, right? Shale gas, shale revolution is providing a great momentum to break down this war, right? Without shale revolution, this is unthinkable. Right? This is thinkable because of shale revolution, right? Why? Two aspects. Shale revolution occurred 2009 in the United States. That doesn't mean that natural gas is exported from the United States to the European countries. Natural gas will be exported beginning 2017, right? No natural gas is moving from the United States to Europe yet, okay? But because of shale revolution, America doesn't import natural gas, okay? So the remaining natural gas that was destined to the United States is provided to European countries. That is changing the pricing mechanism, pricing system, so the natural gas prices are going down. That breaks up Russian pricing monopoly. That's what makes Putin, right, in trouble. That's why Putin is suffering. So indirect effect of shale revolution. And if America begins to export LNG beginning 2017, the impact on Eastern European countries will be much larger. The impact, right? So that's what we can expect. Always, this is just prediction. Putin might, I mean, he is already doing a lot of things to contain American strategy, right? So it'll be interesting. I think this is a critical juncture, very important moment that might determine, again, Russian power. If this energy revolution moves forward as expected, I think it is inevitable that Putin loses power. Gazprom is greatly weakened, losing a lot of money. Then Putin might have to reopen the political system, right? His fellow proteges around him, surrounding, there are many, right? Stupid people following Putin, right? They are following him because he's getting money from Putin, right? But Putin doesn't have any money, right? Then they will leave. So these energy changes, right, lead to political changes. But I mean, exactly the opposite can also happen. Putin successfully retains power, right? Putin successfully retains power over Eastern Europe. Okay, and Gazprom still survives. Gazprom sells still a lot of natural gas to Balkan countries, particularly. Okay, Balkans are particularly weak areas, Balkans, in terms of energy. And Putin is trying to build direct pipeline, right, reaching Balkan area. So if Putin successfully does that, yes, I mean, our, this scenario might change. Why China is important? Yesterday, President Putin visited Beijing, was in Beijing, okay? Then President of China, Xi Jinping and Putin met, right? There are several other issues, but most urgent issue was natural gas agreement. China, I mean, it's a natural partner. China is a great country, right? There will be enormous increase in energy consumption, right? Because China still relies on 70% of energy consumption for coal. Natural gas still 4%. OECD average is 24%. So if China normally develops, China must make a transition from 4% natural gas consumption to more than 20% natural gas consumption. So most of the energy increase in China must be in the natural gas area, right? So where does that China obtain these natural gas? Enormous amount of natural gas, right? Either they succeed in shale gas revolution, or they buy from someone else, right? Which is, I think, theoretically Russia. No country other than Russia can provide that much of natural gas to China, right? But China, Russia, they have negotiated over natural gas agreement over the last 20 years. Okay, Russia sells it, China buys it, right? Builds a pipeline, right? Linking two countries, right? Easy. I mean, it must be longer pipeline, but no problem. I mean, they're neighbors, right? But for 20 years, only talk. They've been, number of meetings, summit meetings over this, but final moment always they didn't reach an agreement. The reason was prices. China demands lower, right? Lower natural gas prices. Russia offers always higher than what China needs. So for 20 years, negotiations, right, ends up with nothing over and over again. This time, there have been rumors if Russia and China successfully pulls off this time over natural gas prices, then they can erase all the U.S. shale gas impacts. And this time will be different. There have been rumors over the last several months, particularly after Ukrainian crisis. Right? So yesterday, Putin and Xi met, and the information that came out of that meeting was that by 21st, by tomorrow, right? One way or another, they are going to make or break the agreement. So we know by tomorrow. Right? Tomorrow will decide the future. Everyone is watching. Right? Now, so China, Russia, very important. I think if these two great powers, if they mutually support each other, I think the impact of that will be enormous. But somehow, I mean, natural gas is just an example. Russia, China, theoretically, right? Theoretically, if they help each other, has an enormous impact. But they are at the same time competitors, right? At the same time competitors. It's always, Russia-China relations have always been very much ambiguous. Someone called it the axis, the alliance of convenience. The alliance of convenience. Russia-China relationship is the alliance of convenience, right? Meaning they can become a friend, but they can always become an enemy. I think that rightly describes the Russian-China relations for a number of reasons. Right? So America knows that. So America sort of exploits the potential conflicts between Russia and China. Right? Russia, China, economically they know the importance of cooperation, but strategically, militarily, right? They don't trust each other. Russia, China, they don't trust. And territories, Russia now holding in the Far East, right? Much of territory in the Far East used to be Chinese territory, right? There are territorial problems there. And one problem facing Russia is much of the Far Eastern area of Russia is now almost occupied by Chinese immigrants, right? So Russia is worried that Russia will lose identity, right? Only western part of Russia remain. The eastern part of Russia, they worried that they lose it to China, right? So that's basic, I think, source of conflicts between these two countries. At the same time, Russia needs investment from China because eastern part of Russia is so underdeveloped. The gap between western part, eastern part, so huge. Without elevating the eastern part economically, the Russian economy doesn't have future, right? Because half of Russia is almost like Africa. So how to elevate this half, Far East? That's a dilemma for Russia. Without Chinese investment, it's impossible. Or Japanese, or Korean investment, right? So these three dilemmas for Russia, right? Three dilemmas for Russia. How to handle these three dilemmas will determine whether or not Russia can rise as a power. China, India, maybe we can, I think we have to talk a little bit more Thursday.